An elderly woman got into her daughter's car, believing she was being taken to a nursing home to be abandoned. Minutes later, she was shocked to see where her daughter had left her. Evelyn walked along the narrow streets of the neighborhood, clutching a small rabbit plush tightly. The present was simple, but carried a promise of joy for her daughter, something Evelyn knew she couldn't offer every day. The sky began to darken, and the silence of the streets was only interrupted by the rhythmic sound of her steps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Evelyn adjusted her thin coat, feeling a chill that didn't come just from the cold, but from an unease she still couldn't identify. That's when she saw him, a man standing a few meters away with his hands in the pockets of a long coat. His eyes were fixed on her, so intense that they made Evelyn tighten her fingers around the plush. The man's expression was indecipherable, but there was something in the way he tilted his head slightly that made Evelyn's heart beat faster. Trying to ignore the feeling of danger, she quickened her pace, but when she looked back, she realized he had also started walking, closing the distance between them. "It can't be a coincidence, he's following me," thought Evelyn as her breathing began to become irregular. Trying to remain calm, she turned onto a side street, hoping it was just paranoia. But the firm sound of footsteps behind her confirmed the worst. Evelyn clutched the plush to her chest and decided to run. Her feet pounded heavily against the asphalt, and she refused to look back. But the sound of the man's footsteps also grew faster. He was chasing her. Panic took over, and she began to taste the metallic taste of fear mixed with fatigue. "Please, someone help me. I can't stop. I can't let him catch me. I need to get home. I need to see my daughter," Evelyn thought as she rounded another corner, hoping the stranger would give up. Her eyes scanned the streets for any sign of life, but everything seemed deserted, as if the whole world had decided to ignore her presence at that moment. The distance between them seemed to shrink, and Evelyn felt as if the sound of the man's footsteps was echoing inside her head. "What does he want from me? Why is he doing this? I just want to get home. I just want to be with my daughter. Please let someone hear me." The plush nearly dropped from her trembling hands, but she clung to it as if it were a protective amulet, a fragile connection to the only reason she kept running. When she finally looked back, she saw him closer than ever, and his face looked even more menacing under the dim light of the street lamps. She felt like her legs might fail her at any moment, but adrenaline pushed her forward, even as the air seemed to run out. Now every corner, every turn was a hope of escaping, of disappearing before he caught up to her. Evelyn turned another corner, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything but the sound of her own ragged breathing. The man was still behind her, or at least that's what she believed. Every shadow seemed to take on a human form. Every distant sound sounded like hurried footsteps. The world around her seemed a blur of darkness and flashing lights, as fear tightened like a knot in her throat. Finally, she saw her house in the distance. The sight of the small weathered door was a spark of hope. Evelyn ran, ignoring the pain spreading through her legs and the weight of fatigue that was beginning to overcome her resistance. Upon reaching the gate, she opened it hurriedly, almost tripping, and entered as if hell itself was at her heels. That's when she saw her. Emma was standing at the entrance to the house, holding a small blanket, with her brown hair falling in disarray over her shoulders and the curious look that only a 6-year-old could have. The girl frowned, clutching the blanket tighter against her chest as she noticed her mother's state. "Mommy, what's wrong? Why are you like that? Are you scared? Did someone do something to you?" Emma asked, her voice thin but filled with genuine concern. There was something in the innocence of the question that seemed to shatter the chaos within Evelyn. Evelyn looked around, her desperate gaze searching for the man, but there was no one. No shadow, no movement, no sound of footsteps. The streets were deserted, only the wind gently rustling the leaves of the trees. The emptiness around her made her feel the weight of reality imposing itself like a cold wave. There was no one chasing her. "Emma, Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice broke. She felt her legs give way and fell to her knees before her daughter, the plush falling from her trembling hands. Not knowing how to explain what was happening, Evelyn simply opened her arms and pulled Emma close. "I'm here, my love, that's all that matters. I'm here with you," she said as she held the girl tightly, as if the embrace could protect her from everything that seemed to be crumbling around her. Emma stood still for a moment, confused, but eventually put her arms around her mother's neck. "Mommy, it's okay. "There's no one here, it's just the two of us like always. You don't have to be afraid," the girl said, trying to sound strong, even without fully understanding what was happening. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the tears flow silently. The feeling of security that her daughter's embrace provided was both a relief and a pain, for she knew something inside her was wrong. "I'm trying, Emma. I'm trying to be strong. For you. Forgive me, my love, forgive me for all this." Evelyn's voice came out almost a whisper, laden with a guilt she couldn't fully express. Emma only hugged her tighter, as if, in the simplicity of a gesture, she could answer all the unspoken words. The years passed, and Emma grew up with the constant presence of Evelyn's hallucinations. The girl, now 14 years old, was beginning to understand that something was wrong, though she still couldn't put into words exactly what. Evelyn's invisible pursuers, paranoid whispers, locked doors with padlocks, and constant vigilance became part of Emma's daily life. Despite this, she never stopped comforting her mother, repeating the same phrase she had learned since childhood. "There's no one here, Mom. It's just us. It's always been just us." That night, Emma arrived home after a long day at school. The sound of her steps echoed through the silent hallway, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. There was something strange in the air, something that made each of her steps feel heavier. The lights were off, but the front door was ajar, which was unusual. "Mom, I'm home," Emma called, her hesitant voice breaking the silence. There was no answer, only the slight creaking of the door as it was pushed open. She entered, her eyes adjusting to the dim light while her heart raced with a feeling that something was terribly wrong. That's when she saw her. Evelyn was lying on the living room floor, her body contorted in an odd way, as if she had collapsed suddenly. Next to her were shattered glass shards, probably from a glass she had been holding before falling. Evelyn's hand was still outstretched, rigid, as if trying to reach for something invisible. Her eyes were open, fixed on an empty spot on the ceiling, and the expression on her face was one of pure terror. "Mom!" Emma screamed, dropping her backpack on the floor and running to her. The sound of her own voice echoed through the room, but brought no answer. The silence was deafening. Emma fell to her knees beside her mother, her hands trembling as she tried to shake her gently. "Mom, wake up, please, wake up. Don't do this to me, not now. I need you. Mom, please." The touch of Evelyn's cold skin made Emma instinctively recoil, the shock running through her body like an electric current. Tears streamed down the girl's face as she tried to control her breathing, looking around as if the room could offer her some explanation. But all she found was the oppressive emptiness and her mother's lifeless eyes, which seemed still trapped on something Emma couldn't see. She swallowed hard, trying to push away the panic that threatened to consume her completely. "Mom, talk to me. Please tell me this is just another one of your crises, that it will pass, that I'm overreacting. Please tell me you're okay," Emma pleaded, as she squeezed Evelyn's hand, trying to ignore the icy touch that seemed to contradict her own words. The sight of her mother lying there, her face contorted with fear and her body lifeless, became an unbearable weight for Emma. She pressed her face against Evelyn's chest, sobbing, feeling the world crumbling around her. The girl murmured through her tears, as if her words could bring her mother back. "You said it was just the two of us, that it would always be like that. You promised. You can't leave me here alone. I don't know what to do without you, Mum. Please come back to me." At that moment, Emma's world shattered. The loneliness that had always accompanied her, once muffled by Evelyn's presence, now seemed like a colossal shadow about to swallow her whole. And the question echoing in her mind, even without an answer, was the most painful of all. What did she see this time? Emma was about to be consumed by despair when she heard a faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from Evelyn's parted lips. It was a breath, frail but still there. Emma froze for a moment, unable to believe what her ears were catching. Relief and fear mingled in a whirlwind inside her, pushing her to action. "Mom, you're alive. I'm going to get help, don't worry, everything will be okay, I promise," Emma said, holding her mother's hand for a moment before reluctantly letting it go. She jumped up, her steps almost stumbling as she ran to the door. The cold night air hit her face as she stepped outside, and her voice cut through the silence as she screamed, "Help! Please, someone help me. My mom needs help." The lights in the neighboring house came on, and a middle-aged man named Eduardo, one of the few neighbors who still spoke to them, appeared at the door with a confused expression. "Emma, what's going on? Are you okay?" "My mom." "She fell, she's on the floor. I don't know what happened, but she can't stay like this. Please, Eduardo, we need to take her to the hospital now," Emma replied, her voice choked with panic. Eduardo didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and followed Emma to the house. Seeing Evelyn on the floor, he frowned but said nothing. He simply lifted her carefully while Emma tried to help, holding her mother's legs. "Let's go quickly. She's still breathing, but it looks serious. Get in the car with her, Emma," Eduardo said with a firmness that seemed to calm the girl, if only for a moment. In the hospital, time seemed to run at its own pace, the seconds dragging as Emma waited for news. Eduardo stood by her side, silent, respecting the anguish evident on her face. When the doctor finally appeared, Emma sprang to her feet, her hands crossed against her chest in an almost protective gesture. "How is she? Is my mother going to be okay? Please tell me it's nothing serious," Emma asked, her voice charged with anxiety and hope. The doctor, a man with a serene expression, made a reassuring gesture before speaking. "Your mother had an episode. It seems she entered a state of extreme agitation and ended up falling. Fortunately, she did not suffer any serious injuries. She is stable now, but we need to run some tests to understand what might be causing these hallucinations." Emma felt an immediate relief, as if a crushing weight had been lifted off her shoulders, but it was soon replaced by growing concern. "An episode? But what does that mean? She's always seeing things that aren't there. This has never happened before, her collapsing like that. What can I do to help?" The doctor tilted his head, understanding the anguish in the young woman's voice. "She needs monitoring. It could be something psychological or even neurological. We can't rule out any possibility without further examination, but for now the important thing is that she's okay and safe. We'll monitor her for a few hours." Emma nodded slowly, clasping her hands together. "I just want her to get better. I just want this to end. I can't bear to see her suffering like this anymore. She used to be so happy. I remember that. I just want my mom back," she said, her voice faltering as tears welled up again. Eduardo placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "She will get better, Emma. Now she's being cared for, and that's what matters. You did the right thing today. You saved her life," he said in a firm, gentle tone. Emma took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. "I just want her to know she's not alone, that I'm here for her, always, even when it seems like everything is falling apart." And in that moment, Emma decided she would do whatever was in her power to help her mother, no matter how difficult it might be. Time passed, and Emma was an adult. One day, she walked calmly through the busy streets, a shopping bag in one hand and the other resting on her rounded belly. The afternoon sun was gentle, and the cool breeze made the moment almost perfect. She thought about how life had changed so much since she found out she was pregnant. Evelyn, even in her wheelchair, was happier than Emma had seen her in years. The baby seemed to have brought back something they had lost over time: hope. As she passed the bakery, Emma stopped to admire the freshly baked breads, their warm, comforting scent invading her senses. For a moment, she smiled, thinking about how it would be to introduce the baby to that world of small joys. But suddenly a sharp pain tore through her belly, knocking the air out of her lungs. "Ah, what is this?" she muttered, her face contorted in agony as the shopping bag slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. The pain increased with every second, as if something was pulling her life force away and her knees threatened to buckle. Passers-by began to notice what was happening. An older woman approached, concern etched on her face. "Miss, are you okay? Do you need help?" Emma tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. She could only place her hands on her belly, as if she could protect the baby from the pain consuming her. She felt sweat running down her face and her vision started to blur. "It's my baby and something's wrong," she managed to whisper, almost without strength. The world around her seemed to spin as the pain intensified. Emma tried to lean on a nearby pole, but her knees finally gave way and she fell to the ground, gasping. "Please, someone, help," she said with difficulty, tears streaming down her face. A passing man ran over to her, kneeling by her side. "Calm down, we'll help you. I'll call an ambulance right now," he said, taking his phone out of his pocket with hurried hands. He looked around, seeking support. Can someone bring water? Quick! Emma grabbed the man's arm tightly, her eyes wide with panic. My baby, please don't let anything happen to him. He's all I have, she said, her voice almost pleading. The distant sound of a siren began to fill the air, rapidly approaching. Emma could barely perceive what was happening around her, her body surrendering to exhaustion and pain. All she could think about was her mother's face, who was probably waiting for her at home with a smile and hope in her heart. And now, Emma feared she might never be able to return that smile. When Emma came home, her pale face and slow movements betrayed the weariness of that sudden scare. As soon as she opened the door, she caught sight of Evelyn sitting in her wheelchair in the living room, beside James, her husband. They were conversing in a casual tone, as if nothing bad could happen in that little refuge they called home. Emma, what happened? You look so drained, James exclaimed, immediately getting up and going towards her with a worried look. He gently took Emma's arm, as if afraid she might collapse right there. Emma sighed, trying to reassure him as she set the bag down. It was just a scare. I was walking down the street, and suddenly, I felt this sharp pain in my belly. I thought it might be something with the baby, but it passed. I think it was just fatigue or something I ate, Emma said, her voice laden with an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Evelyn frowned, evident concern in her eyes. My daughter, you need to rest more. You can't be out there straining yourself like that. You have to think about the baby and about yourself too. What if something serious had happened? I wouldn't forgive myself. James caressed Emma's face, trying to ease the tension. Evelyn's right, love. You need to take better care of yourself. Tomorrow I'll leave work early and take care of whatever you need so you can stay home. I don't want you risking yourself like that again. Emma nodded but felt the weight of her responsibilities. I know. It's just that I keep thinking that I need to keep everything in order, prepare everything for the baby's arrival. I don't want anything to be missing for him. I want him to have everything we never had, you know, she responded with a mixture of frustration and affection in her voice. Later that night, while everyone was asleep, Emma was awakened by a strange noise. A dull, insistent sound came from the front door, as if someone was trying to get in. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling a chill run up her spine. Was she imagining things? Not wanting to wake James or Evelyn, Emma got up carefully and walked to the door, her bare feet touching the cold floor. The sound continued, now fainter, as if whoever was there had changed their mind. When she finally opened the door, the early morning wind enveloped her, and the emptiness outside was almost oppressive. There was nothing, only the silent darkness, with the deserted street and the dim light from the lampposts. Emma stood there for a moment, looking around, trying to understand what could have caused that noise. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she whispered to herself, Am I becoming like my mother? Am I going to start seeing and hearing things that don't exist too? Closing the door carefully, Emma went back to the bedroom, but sleep didn't come. The unsettling feeling that something wasn't right accompanied her for the rest of the night. The next morning, Emma awoke to the smell of food being prepared in the kitchen. Despite the discomfort of the previous night, she was grateful that Evelyn insisted on helping with the household chores. It was a way for her mother to feel useful, even with the limitations imposed by the wheelchair. Emma got up slowly, trying to ignore the tiredness that seemed to persist, and went to the kitchen. Evelyn was standing next to the stove with a strangely rigid expression. Her movements, usually careful, were now quick and almost abrupt as she stirred the pot. Without turning her face, Evelyn said in a cutting voice, Emma, your little prank last night was cruel. You knew it would scare me and you still did it. I don't know what you wanted to prove, but it's not funny. Emma stopped at the kitchen entrance, confused. Prank? What are you talking about, Mum? I didn't do anything last night. I was so exhausted I could barely sleep properly. Evelyn turned abruptly, holding the wooden spoon like a weapon. Her eyes were full of accusations, but also something deeper. Fear. Don't lie to me, Emma. I heard you at the door. The noise, the footsteps. You wanted me to think there was someone there, didn't you? To make me even more paranoid, to make me seem crazy again. But I know what I heard. The intensity of Evelyn's voice made Emma take a step back, surprised by the sudden outburst. Mom, for God's sake, I didn't do anything. I also heard the noise. I thought it was something, but when I opened the door, there was nobody. I swear, you know I would never do something like that. Evelyn banged the spoon on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. She was trembling, both with anger and frustration. "You think I'm an idiot, that I can't tell when people are playing tricks on me? I've been fooled so many times, Emma. By strangers, by people who said they loved me. You're not going to be the one to start that now." Emma tried to approach, but Evelyn pointed the spoon at her as if creating a barrier. "I don't want to hear any more excuses. I trusted you. I thought at least you were on my side." Emma's voice trembled, a mixture of pain and indignation. "Mum, why do you always think I'm against you? I'm your daughter. I'm the only one who stayed by your side when everything fell apart. I would never do anything to hurt you. I just want us to have peace for you to trust me, but it seems like that's never enough." The silence that followed was cutting. Evelyn looked at the pot for a moment, breathing heavily before muttering, "You say that, but I know what I felt. I know what I heard. If it wasn't you, then who was it?" Emma didn't respond. She just stood there, feeling the distance between them growing even wider, like an impossible chasm to cross. As much as she wanted to, Emma didn't know how to convince her mother that she was being sincere, and deep down she began to wonder if there was something wrong with her, or if, like her mother, she was starting to lose control over reality. The next day began with a shadow of uncertainty looming over the house. James arrived in the morning with a grave expression, speechless for a moment. He left his backpack on the couch and, seeing Emma in the living room, sighed deeply. "Emma, I need to tell you something." Emma looked at him, feeling the weight of those words even before they were spoken. "What is it, James? What happened?" She knew deep down that whatever he said wouldn't be good. He sat on the sofa and looked at her with sadness. "I got fired. Armando. He didn't think I was contributing enough. I knew it was only a matter of time, but I didn't want to believe it. Now, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we'll pay the bills, Emma. I don't know what to do." Emma remained silent, trying to process the information as the anguish began to take hold of her chest. The lack of a steady income was now a reality that cruelly imposed itself. She was afraid of the future, afraid of how things would unfold. Evelyn was becoming increasingly difficult to deal with, and the baby was still to come. How to face all this without a solution in sight? "It's going to be okay, James," she said, trying to sound confident, but her voice betrayed the fear she felt. "We'll find a way to make it work. I'll figure something out." James' look was not one of doubt, but of a concern that shone through every line of his face. "How? What are you going to do, Emma? I don't know if I can expect you to sacrifice more for us." Emma thought for a moment, trying to calm her mind. She knew she needed to act, that she needed to do something to help. So at night, when James was resting and Evelyn was watching TV, Emma made a silent decision. She got up and went to the computer. There, on the illuminated screen, she began to search for job openings. Nothing too grand, nothing that required experience, something that would be quick and could help with the immediate household expenses. That's when she found the nanny job for a family that seemed to be looking for someone with experience. She didn't have much, but she knew she could learn quickly. The next day, she went to the Caleb family's house. It was a large house with a garden and luxurious furniture, a stark contrast to her reality. Emma felt out of place at first, but the lady who opened the door, Charlotte, soon made her feel more comfortable despite a certain critical gaze that never ceased to pass over her. Charlotte smiled, but there was something forced about her smile. "So you're interested in the job?" Charlotte asked with a cutting voice. "We need someone who knows what they're doing, Emma. I don't like wasting time, so I hope you're really willing to work hard." Emma tried to maintain her composure, feeling the pressure increase on her shoulders. "Yes, I'm willing. I really need this job." Caleb, Charlotte's husband, entered the room shortly after. He was a friendly man with a friendly look and welcoming demeanor, quite different from his wife. "Don't worry, Emma. It's going to be all right. My wife is a bit rigid, but we'll try to make this work. I believe you'll be a good addition to our family." Despite Charlotte's coldness, Emma felt a certain security in Caleb. He seemed genuinely concerned about the situation, and his welcoming attitude was a relief. Maybe this was the kind of job she needed to take a step forward. However, when the doors closed behind her and the house door closed at night, Emma felt the weight of the decision. She knew that this job could be an opportunity, but she was also aware that living with Charlotte could be difficult. There was something about that woman that bothered her, but she tried to push those thoughts aside. After all, she had no choice. Her family's future depended on her ability to deal with the difficulties, no matter how much it meant sacrificing some of her own peace of mind. The next day, Emma woke up earlier than usual, feeling the weight of the lie on her chest. She looked at James and Evelyn still sleeping and had to fight the urge to tell the truth. But she knew that if she was honest, their reactions would be harder to deal with than the lie she was about to tell. With a sigh, she grabbed her bag and prepared to leave. She approached the still sleeping James and left a quick note on the table. "I'm going to take the exam. I'll be back in a few hours." The lie sounded so simple, but the weight of it crushed her. James wouldn't question it, he trusted her. But with every step she took towards the door, Emma felt the poison of guilt spreading inside her. As she left, the morning sun seemed colder than usual, and the feeling of hiding something from James and Evelyn hovered like a shadow. But she needed this. She knew it was the only way to secure a future for them all. Arriving at the Caleb's house, she was greeted by Caleb, who was at the door with his welcoming smile. He didn't seem to have noticed the tension in Emma, and somehow that made her feel a little more comfortable. "Good morning, Emma. You arrived just in time. Charlotte is inside and the baby just woke up. She might need help with the feeding. You know how to handle babies, don't you?" Emma gave a nervous smile, trying to appear more confident than she really felt. "Yes, I do. I'll take care of him while you and your wife take care of other things." Charlotte was in the living room, apparently in a good mood, but Emma quickly noticed that her cold and distant attitude hadn't changed. The woman was sitting, watching TV with her arms crossed, but gave a slight smile as she saw Emma come in. "Ah, you're here. Let's see how you do. The baby is in the next room." Charlotte spoke without much enthusiasm, her voice sounding more like an obligation than a greeting. Emma entered the room and found the baby, a few-month-old boy, lying in a crib. He was calm, his big eyes fixed on Emma as she approached. She couldn't help but smile at him, feeling a sense of affection and protection invade her chest. It was a relief to be there, away from the lies she was living at home, even if only for a moment. She picked up the baby carefully with firm but gentle hands and began to feed him. Caleb entered the room again, observing from a distance with an approving look. "You're doing a good job, Emma. Charlotte has always been a bit difficult with these things, but I think you'll be able to handle it." Emma smiled, feeling a wave of relief at not being judged, but at the same time Charlotte's smile, who was still in the room, seemed increasingly uncomfortable. She observed everything with a watchful eye, as if she was waiting for something to happen. "I hope you know that the work here isn't just taking care of the baby, Emma. We have other needs, and I hope you're ready to deal with that," said Charlotte in a sharper tone than before. Emma swallowed hard, but didn't reply. She couldn't afford to question the demands of Caleb's wife. She needed the job. She needed the stability it offered, even if it meant tolerating Charlotte's coldness and the silent pressure of the situation. With the baby in her arms, Emma focused on the moment, trying to block out Charlotte's words and the doubts that began to arise in her mind. She knew that for now, she just needed to stay focused, take care of the baby, and do her best. The rest she would try to deal with later. The future, however, seemed increasingly uncertain, and the fear that the lie would be discovered never left her mind. Over the following days, the tension between Emma and Charlotte intensified. What initially seemed like a simple working relationship, with the responsibility of caring for Caleb's baby, soon turned into something more complicated. Charlotte, with her cold and imposing manner, began to extend the demands beyond the tasks related to the child, forcing Emma to perform a series of other activities that had nothing to do with what had been agreed upon. On one of those days, Emma was in the bedroom putting the baby down for a nap, when Charlotte came in without knocking, with a look that made it clear she had something else in mind. "Emma, I need you to clean the garage. It's a mess out there and I can't let that slide." "Don't worry, I'll set everything up for you. It won't take long," said Charlotte, her voice impersonal, as if she were talking about something trivial. Emma stood still for a moment, still holding the baby in her arms. The pregnancy was starting to weigh on her, and the fatigue was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. "Charlotte, I'm a little tired today. I'm not feeling very well. Maybe we could leave it for later," she replied, trying to sound convincing. The weight of the lie was something she carried constantly, but that moment was especially difficult. Emma's body, already overburdened by the pregnancy, could no longer ignore the physical difficulties that arose. Charlotte, however, didn't seem willing to accept that excuse. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer to Emma. "I didn't ask if you were tired, Emma. I said I need you to clean the garage. You have no choice. Here everyone works, and it doesn't matter if you're pregnant or not." "I didn't ask you to be pregnant, so you need to learn to deal with it," Charlotte replied sharply. Emma's blood boiled. She knew she was being treated unfairly, but she couldn't afford to defy Charlotte. Without the job, she wouldn't be able to support herself, and even more so the baby that was coming. She took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that threatened to fall. She didn't want to show weakness in front of Charlotte. "All right, I'll do it," Emma said, her voice tense. She knew she had no other choice but to give in, although the weight of the situation made her even more anguished. The next day, after another sleepless night, and with her body feeling heavier each time, Emma headed to the garage. The air was stuffy, and the smell of dust permeated the environment. Emma lacked the strength to do more than necessary, but she knew she couldn't leave anything behind. Charlotte wouldn't allow it. As she worked, her eyes watered with fatigue. She wondered how much longer she could endure. Each movement seemed more difficult than the last. The pressure on her shoulders increased, not only due to the pregnancy, but also by the weight of Charlotte's orders. "Emma," Charlotte called from the garage door, "this isn't good enough. I want everything impeccable. If I have to come back here and see anything out of place, you won't like the consequences." Those words, spoken without a shred of empathy, wounded her more than Emma could admit. She wanted to scream, to say she was exhausted, that she couldn't take it anymore, but the fear of losing everything made her swallow her words. She simply continued, with sweat dripping down her forehead, her belly now visibly larger and her body begging for rest. The thought that all she really wanted was to be treated with dignity and respect seemed increasingly distant. And as she continued cleaning the garage, Emma felt a wave of despair take hold. Would she ever be able to escape all of this? On the other stifling day, the heat seemed to intensify as time passed. Emma woke up with an unbearable feeling of heaviness in her body. Her belly, already large and visible, was more painful than ever, and she could barely get out of bed. The pain was constant and deep, as if her body were fighting against everything at the same time. She tried to ignore it, tried to swallow the pain, but she couldn't. Every movement was torture, and every breath became more difficult. Charlotte, as always, gave no room for weakness. As soon as Emma entered the kitchen, trying to find the strength to get up, Charlotte's authoritative voice called out to her, "Emma, the house won't clean itself. I can't do everything alone. You have to help. Go clean the living room right away, and quickly. I don't have time to wait." Emma felt her blood boil, hatred and fear mixing inside her. She wanted to scream, to protest, but she knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. The fear of losing the little she had, the job, the roof over her head, the possibility of giving the baby a better life, silenced her. She looked at Charlotte, took a deep breath and forced her feet to move even though her body couldn't keep up. With slow and faltering steps, Emma dragged herself down the hallway, each step becoming an impossible challenge to overcome. The pain was intense, but she couldn't stop. Charlotte wouldn't let her. When she reached the living room, she felt a sharp twinge in her back. Her vision blurred, her legs weakened, and before she could do anything, the floor swallowed her. Suddenly, the world became a whirlwind of distorted sounds and images. She heard Charlotte shouting something, but her voice sounded distant, as if she were listening through a tunnel. All that was left for Emma was pain and a feeling of absolute incapacity. Darkness enveloped her, and she fainted right there, on the cold, filthy floor of the house. Charlotte was standing beside her, visibly frustrated but also with a touch of disdain. "Emma, what are you doing? Get up now." "I can't do everything alone," Charlotte said, without a hint of empathy in her voice. It was at that moment that Caleb entered the room. He was older, but kindness still reflected in his eyes, and when he saw Emma lying on the floor, his expression turned to concern. "Charlotte, what happened to her?" he asked, his voice grave but filled with apprehension. Charlotte, as always, downplayed the situation. "She's faking it. She's always doing this to avoid working." But Caleb didn't seem convinced. He approached Emma, crouching down beside her. "She's very pale. Doesn't seem to be faking," "We need to take her to the hospital." With trembling hands, Caleb helped her up, but Emma's body was inert, the pain too strong to be ignored. When he picked her up in his arms, he realized the situation was more serious than he had imagined. Charlotte was still protesting, but Caleb, without listening to another word, motioned for her to be silent. "Charlotte, we're taking her to the hospital now. Don't argue with me," Caleb said, with a firmness that she did not dare to challenge. Emma barely heard the conversation. Darkness dominated her, and she felt as if she were being dragged to a distant place, where there was no more pain, where there was no more fear. She just wanted that moment to end. She wanted to wake up and find herself free from all the pressure and suffering she had endured until then. But as she was carried in Caleb's arms, she knew that what lay ahead would be even more difficult. The pain she felt now was just the beginning. Here's the direct translation of the text from Portuguese to English, maintaining the same structure, punctuation, and formatting as the original. The hospital was bustling that afternoon, but the commotion didn't seem to reach the small corner where Emma, pale and weak, was being attended to. Caleb was by her side, holding her hand firmly, his eyes restless and worried. Every time the doctor looked at the exams, Emma's expression became tenser. The stomach pain wouldn't go away, and she felt that no matter how hard she fought, she had no control over what was happening to her body. The doctor's voice became a distant murmur, but the only thing Emma could understand was the gravity of the situation. "There is a severe complication. The baby needs immediate care," the doctor said, looking seriously at the monitors. "If we don't take action now, the risk for both is enormous." Caleb stood completely still, his heart tight with worry. He had always been a man of few words, but now he seemed paralyzed by the idea that the worst could happen. He looked at Emma, wishing he could do more, but he knew it was out of his hands. On the other side of the room, Charlotte was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, an indifferent expression on her face. Her eyes were fixed on Emma, but there wasn't a trace of empathy or concern. "If she dies, life goes on," Charlotte said with a coldness that seemed to cut the air around her. "It's not like she's anyone important." Caleb looked at her with a stern gaze but said nothing. He knew his words would be useless. Charlotte had always been like that, insensitive and cruel, and even in the face of the gravity of the situation, she didn't seem to care about Emma's or the baby's health. At that moment, the hospital door burst open, and James came running in, his eyes wild with worry. He looked around until he found Emma, pale and in obvious pain, on the bed, and went to her, desperate. "Emma, what happened? What's going on with you?" James asked, his voice full of dread. He crouched down beside her, taking her hand tightly. "Talk to me, please." Emma tried to open her eyes but could barely focus. She felt her breath was short, and everything seemed to spin. It was then, amid the confusion, that James looked around for answers, and his eyes stopped on Caleb. He stood up and looked at the man with suspicion. "Who are you?" James asked, his voice choked with anger and worry. "And what are you doing here? How did my wife get to you?" Caleb took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, and replied, "She was a nanny for my son. She was working for us." James, however, was stunned. "Nanny? Emma didn't work. She never told me anything about that," he said, incredulity in his voice. "What's going on here, Caleb? Why did she never tell me about this job?" Caleb tried to explain, but Charlotte, impassive, cut into the conversation abruptly. "She did work, and very well, in fact. Just because you didn't know about it doesn't mean she wasn't a good employee," she said, trying to sound convincing, but her voice betrayed a lack of genuine interest. James stood silent for a moment, his mind trying to process everything that was being said. He looked at Charlotte and then at Caleb, feeling a pang of anger growing inside him. How had he not known anything? How had Emma hidden this from him? He then approached Caleb, his gaze full of distrust. "This doesn't make sense. If she was working for you, why didn't she tell me? Where was she all this time?" Caleb looked at Emma, visibly embarrassed, and replied, I didn't know what she was going through. She never mentioned that she was having difficulties, but she was a good employee. She always did what we asked." The silence that followed was heavy, and James walked away, his eyes full of confusion and anger. He looked at Emma, seeing the pain etched on her face, and a feeling of helplessness overwhelmed him. How had he not known about all this? How had Emma subjected herself to all this without telling him? As James walked away, Charlotte leaned back against the wall, watching everything with a blank expression. She didn't care about the questions. She didn't care about what James felt. Her only concern was that the problem was no longer hers. The situation was becoming increasingly confusing, and Emma's future, which until then had seemed uncertain, was now shrouded in a web of lies and omissions. Charlotte's words echoed in James's mind, but he knew that deep down what mattered most at that moment was saving Emma's life and her baby's, even if it meant unraveling all the hidden truths. The silence in the waiting room was broken by the sound of the doctor's firm footsteps. He had a serious expression, as if the gravity of the situation weighed on his shoulders. Caleb, James, and even Charlotte, who maintained her cold demeanor, immediately looked up. The doctor, holding a clipboard, looked at James and took a deep breath before starting to speak. "Mr. James, we need to be quick. Your wife's situation is more complicated than we imagined. Emma has a condition called severe preeclampsia, and to save her life and the baby's, we'll have to deliver the baby right now. The baby is not yet fully developed. We're talking about a premature delivery at 7 months," he explained, pausing to gauge their reactions. The doctor's words felt like a punch in the gut to James. He turned pale, his eyes wide, trying to process what he had just heard. 7 months, but that's too early. "Will the baby be able to survive?" he asked, his voice full of desperation and concern. The doctor nodded, but his gaze showed there were no guarantees. "Medicine has advanced a lot, and with the necessary care, the baby has a good chance. But time is crucial. We need to act now." Caleb closed his eyes, visibly shaken. He gripped the hat he was holding in his hands tightly, as if he wanted to hold on to something solid amidst the turbulence. Charlotte, on the other hand, remained motionless, showing no reaction beyond a slight roll of her eyes, as if she considered it all a great inconvenience. James looked at the doctor, and then at the door leading to the room where Emma was being prepared. The idea that something could happen to her or the baby terrified him. "I want to be with her. Please let me be by my wife's side," he pleaded, his voice broken by emotion. "Unfortunately, that won't be possible during the surgery. But I'll make sure she knows you're here and that you care about her," the doctor replied gently before leaving for the operating room. Meanwhile, Emma was in the operating room, her eyes watery and her breathing labored with fear. The bright lights above her seemed overwhelming, and the sound of the medical equipment was a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears, but she couldn't prevent the anxiety from taking over. The thought that something could happen to her baby terrified her. "I want my baby to be okay. Please do whatever it takes to save him," Emma murmured, trying to stay strong although her voice trembled. A nurse by her side gently touched her hand. "We're doing everything we can. You're strong, and your baby will be too. Trust us." Outside, James was pacing back and forth like a caged lion. The weight was unbearable, and every second felt like an eternity. He stopped abruptly and looked at Caleb, a mixture of guilt and anger on his face. "I should have known. I should have protected her from this. She was sacrificing herself while I was blind to what was happening," he said, his voice filled with pain. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He just sighed deeply and said, "We all have our failures, son. But now what matters is that she and the baby are okay. Don't waste time with regrets now." Inside the operating room, the procedure was beginning. The doctor, focused, gave precise instructions to the team. Emma was sedated, and soon the atmosphere became even more tense. Every step was essential. Every movement determined the future of that new life that was about to come into the world. When the first cry echoed through the room, everyone breathed a sigh of relief for a brief moment. The baby was small, frail, but alive. A nurse quickly took them to intensive care, while another informed Emma, who was starting to regain consciousness. "Your baby is alive, a strong boy. We'll take care of him," said the nurse with a comforting smile. Emma smiled weakly, tears streaming down her face. She was still weak, but the relief of knowing her son was alive was indescribable. "James, I want to see James," she murmured, before closing her eyes again. The door to the operating room finally opened, and the doctor appeared with a less burdened expression. He approached James and Caleb, while Charlotte remained indifferent on the side. "The baby was born prematurely, but he's breathing. He was taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, and the next few days will be crucial. Emma is also stable, but she will need absolute rest, he explained. James felt an immense weight lifted off his shoulders, but he still couldn't fully relax. He looked at the doctor with teary eyes and whispered, "Can I see them?" "Yes, but only for a few minutes," the doctor replied, indicating the way. Upon entering the room, James saw Emma lying there, pale, but with a faint smile. He rushed to her, gently holding her hand. "You are incredible, Emma. Our son. He's here and we'll take care of him together. I promise everything will be okay," James said, his voice choked with emotion. Emma squeezed his hand, still weak but with determination. "I just want him to be okay. Our boy. He's everything to me." In that moment, all the lies, sacrifices, and difficulties seemed insignificant in the face of the new life that had begun. But James knew their journey was just starting. The days passed with a mixture of challenges and small moments of relief. Emma, with the support of James, Caleb, and even Evelyn, was finally discharged and returned home. Although she was still weak, the smile on her face as she held little Benjamin in her arms was the greatest proof that it had all been worth it. In the living room, Evelyn, still in her wheelchair, looked tenderly at her grandson. The baby, with his peaceful breathing and barely open, curious eyes, seemed to find a refuge of peace in his grandmother's arms. Evelyn held him carefully, as if each moment was precious. "He has his mother's eyes," Evelyn murmured, smiling as she ran her fingers through Benjamin's fine hair. "And I'll do everything to protect him, the way I couldn't protect you," she added, her voice laden with emotion. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, James and Emma were talking. He was still shaken by the recent discoveries and the lie Emma had carried for so long. "You should have told me, Emma. We're a family, and I need to be by your side through the difficulties, not kept in the dark. It was hard to accept that you were secretly working to support the house, especially while pregnant. I should have noticed, but I feel useless for not having helped." Emma sighed, her eyes downcast, full of regret. "I know, James. It wasn't fair to you, but at the time, I felt so desperate. You had lost your job, the situation was tight, and I just wanted to relieve the burden. I didn't want to worry you anymore. I'm truly sorry. I just wanted to do what was best for all of us." James looked at her for a few moments, struggling with the mix of feelings. He knew Emma always put family first, but the weight of responsibility seemed to have fallen entirely on her. He reached out, gently touching Emma's face. "I understand your intentions, but I promise this won't happen again. We'll face everything together without secrets, Emma. That's the only way for us to move forward as a family." Before Emma could respond, a distinct sound echoed through the house, a loud, sharp noise like something banging on the front door. They glanced at each other, alarmed. James got up quickly, his muscles tense, and carefully walked towards the door. Before James could reach the door, the sound of a scream cut through the silence. Emma and James looked at each other, confused and alarmed. It was Evelyn. The intensity of the scream made Emma forget about the noise at the door and run towards the living room. What she saw made her heart freeze. Evelyn was holding Benjamin, but her eyes were filled with despair and anger. She was holding the baby tightly, shaking him slightly as she shouted disjointed words. "It's him. It's him. This baby is haunting me. Can't you see? He's here to end me, to destroy what's left." Emma stopped for a moment, too shocked to react. The scene seemed so surreal that her mind took a few seconds to process what was happening. James arrived shortly after, his eyes wide, and tried to move forward, but Emma raised her hand, indicating that she needed to handle it. "Evelyn, drop him now." Emma's voice trembled, but the determination in her eyes was clear. She advanced slowly, hands outstretched, trying not to startle her mother any further. "You don't know what you're saying. This is madness, Mom. Please give me Benjamin. He's just a baby, he can't hurt you." Evelyn shook her head vehemently, tears streaming down her face, marked by time and suffering. "You don't understand, Emma. He looks at me as if he knows everything, as if he's here to punish me. Ever since he arrived, I've been hearing footsteps, seeing shadows. It's no coincidence. He's the reason for all of this." Emma felt the desperation growing inside her. She took another step closer, ignoring James's protests, asking her to go slowly. "Mom, listen to what you're saying. This doesn't make sense. You're tired, you're confused. It's not Benjamin." You're letting yourself be carried away by your hallucinations again." Suddenly, Evelyn screamed again, hugging the baby as if she were protecting herself from an invisible enemy. Emma, desperate, lost her patience and pulled Benjamin from her mother's hands. The baby started crying and Emma held him close to her chest, protecting him while looking at Evelyn with eyes full of hurt. "You're crazy, Mum. How can you do this to your own grandson? He's innocent. You need help. You need to stop these absurd ideas before you hurt someone." Evelyn shrank back in the wheelchair, her hands trembling. Her eyes were full of pain and confusion, as if the world around her was crumbling. "I'm not crazy, Emma. I know what I see, what I feel. You don't believe me, but one day you'll understand. This baby, he's not what he seems." Emma, still trembling, turned to James. "I don't know what to do with her. This has gone too far. What if she really hurts Benjamin? I can't let that happen." James, visibly shaken, ran his hand through his hair, looking from Evelyn to Emma, not knowing how to react. Benjamin's crying echoed through the room, a constant reminder of how unsustainable this situation was. At that moment, Emma felt like she was losing her mother to an abyss from which she couldn't escape. And worst of all, somewhere deep down, a small part of her feared that Evelyn might be right. Emma took a deep breath as she rocked Benjamin in the crib. After the episode with Evelyn, she and James agreed it would be better to limit the mother's contact with the baby. Emma knew this would break Evelyn's heart, but there was no choice. Benjamin's well-being came first. "James, I'm going to need to go back to work at Caleb's house. We have no other choice now and we need money to keep everything here going," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady, even though she knew how much this hurt James. He looked at her with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "You still think it's a good idea to work there, Emma? Charlotte doesn't like you and that job almost cost you your life." Emma sighed, holding back the tears that threatened to escape. "I know, James, but we need to. We have no other choice now. I'll just go there for a little while longer, until we can find something better." James hesitated but eventually agreed with a slight nod of his head. The next day, Emma returned to Caleb's house. Charlotte welcomed her with the same cold look as always. "You're late, Emma. The baby has already cried twice. But of course I don't expect much from someone who keeps making up excuses to be absent," said Charlotte, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emma swallowed hard, knowing that arguing wouldn't help. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Charlotte. I'll make up for the delay and make sure everything is in order." Without wasting time, she went to take care of the household chores, even though her body was still weak after the surgery. As Emma was cleaning the living room floor, she heard Charlotte's footsteps approaching. The woman stopped beside her and, in an acidic tone, said, "You know, Emma, if you can't handle this job, maybe you should look for something else. I don't want anyone sloppy around here." Before Emma could respond, she felt something coiling around her leg. It was Charlotte's foot, which subtly pushed her, but enough to make her lose her balance. Emma tried to hold on, but the wet floor made it impossible to avoid the fall. She fell with a dull thud, pain radiating through her hip and stomach. Caleb entered the room at that exact moment, his face assuming an expression of shock upon seeing Emma on the floor. "What's going on here? Emma, are you okay?" Charlotte, with a perfectly innocent face, answered before Emma could speak. "She tripped, dear. I told her to be careful with the wet floor, but she didn't listen." Emma looked at Charlotte, feeling the anger boil inside her, but knew that accusing her would be no use. Caleb helped her up, his worried gaze fixed on her. "Emma, go sit down. I'll call a doctor if you need to." "No, Mr. Caleb, I'm fine," Emma said, trying to sound convincing, though she felt the throbbing pain. Caleb insisted, but Emma shook her head. "I just need to rest a bit. I promise I'm fine." As Caleb left the room, Emma cast a loaded look at Charlotte, who merely smiled smugly. "You should be more careful, Emma. We don't want anything bad to happen to you, do we?" Emma knew that incident wouldn't be the last, but she also knew she needed to stay there, at least until she found a way out. A few weeks passed, and Emma began to notice a strange pattern. Whenever payday approached, Charlotte would make up excuses or disappear at the right moment. It was Caleb who had hired her, but Charlotte was responsible for the payments. Emma decided she couldn't continue to ignore the situation. That afternoon, after finishing her chores and taking care of Caleb's baby, Emma went to the room where Charlotte was sitting on a luxurious sofa, flipping through a magazine. "Mrs. Charlotte, I need to talk to you about payment. It's been over a month since I haven't been paid, and I won't be able to support my home if this continues." Charlotte slowly raised her eyes, her face assuming an almost mocking expression. "Ah, yes, Emma, the payment. I was going to talk to you about that. Unfortunately, we've had some financial problems this month, I hope you understand, but we can't pay now." Emma felt the ground disappear from under her feet. She knew that was a lie. Caleb was a wealthy man, and this house was living proof that financial problems were far from being a reality for them. "Mrs. Charlotte, with all due respect, I know Mr. Caleb is not having difficulties. Please, I work hard here, even while pregnant, and I depend on this money to take care of my son." Charlotte closed the magazine with a snap, leaning forward. "Emma, I don't like the tone you're using with me. You should be grateful to have a job, especially considering your condition. If you don't like our rules, maybe you should look for work elsewhere." Charlotte's words pierced Emma like blades. She felt her eyes burn but refused to cry in front of that woman. "I'm not asking for any favors, Mrs. Charlotte. I worked and deserve to be paid. What you're doing to me is not fair." Charlotte smiled coldly, rising. "Fair? Emma, life is rarely fair. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important things to do than listen to your complaints." Emma stood there, motionless, feeling Charlotte's cruel words echo in her mind like a definitive sentence. She watched the woman leave the room with that confident, indifferent stride, without even looking back, as if Emma were just a disposable object. For a few moments, Emma couldn't move, feeling a wave of despair tightening her chest like an impossible knot to untie. The anger rose quickly, but was soon swallowed by fear and helplessness. Without the payment, everything she had been trying to sustain seemed to crumble around her. The image of Benjamin came to her mind, so small, so fragile, totally dependent on her. How could she feed him? How could she offer him any stability? And worse, how would she face James, who already suspected the true nature of this job? He believed Emma was undergoing medical exams, but now she didn't even have the money to justify the risk she had been taking. When she finally managed to leave that house, night had fallen. The way back seemed longer than usual. The cold wind cut her face, and each step seemed to weigh more than the previous one. Emma walked with her head down, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she could find some magical solution to her problems there. The weight of the world seemed to crush her in a way she had never felt before. For the first time, the idea that perhaps she was fighting a losing battle crept into her thoughts, spreading like an inevitable shadow. She tried to push these ideas away, but it was hard when everything seemed so out of control. Upon arriving home, she saw James sitting on the couch, his shoulders relaxed and a tired smile on his face. For a brief moment, Emma wanted to pretend that everything was all right, that smile was enough to erase the worries that consumed her. But her expression betrayed her before she could force herself to disguise it. James noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing with concern as he stood up, moving towards her. "Did something happen at work?" he asked, his voice loaded with a genuine care that Emma knew she didn't deserve. Not after everything she'd been hiding. She took a deep breath, trying to organize the thoughts that were in complete chaos. The words seemed stuck in her throat, but she knew she couldn't put off that conversation any longer. "James," she began, her voice trembling, "they didn't pay me. Charlotte said they're having financial problems, but I know it's a lie. They just don't want to pay me." The confession came out in a whisper, laden with shame and frustration. James frowned, and the evident concern on his face soon gave way to indignation. He crossed his arms, his eyes fixed on hers. "So why do you keep going there, Emma? Why do you put up with that? I don't want to see you being exploited, especially when you're pregnant. You have to stop." His voice was firm, but there was no anger, only a mixture of despair and frustration. Emma shook her head, feeling the tears escape, hot and painful. "And do what, James? Who's going to support us? Who's going to put food on the table? I can't just stop, we have no other choice, but I don't know what to do anymore." Her voice broke at the end, and she brought her hands to her face as if she wanted to hide the weight her words carried. James didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he approached and enveloped her in a tight embrace, a gesture that conveyed more support than any words could offer. Emma let herself sink into that embrace, but the despair inside her didn't diminish. She knew that something needed to change, and fast, or all that struggle would end up destroying what little was left of her. In the midst of that tense moment, Emma's cell phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled away from James's embrace with some hesitation, quickly wiping away her tears before answering. "Hello?" Her voice still carried the fragility of recent despair, but what she heard from the other end of the line made her heart stop for a second. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Emma. This is the Central Bank. We've detected that there is a considerable amount pending in your account from old deposits that had not been processed. We would like to confirm some information before releasing the amount." She almost dropped the phone. "What? Money? A lot of money." For a moment, Emma thought she was mishearing. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand." The person on the other end confirmed, detailing the amounts and explaining that, due to a system error, a significant amount had been held in her account for months, but would now be released. When the call ended, Emma was paralyzed. The phone still in her hand, her eyes wide open. Happiness came like an overwhelming wave, almost crushing the weight of everything she had been going through. A smile formed on her lips, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Finally, a solution. Finally, some relief. The money could solve so many things: pay off debts, secure Benjamin's livelihood, maybe even allow her to stop working at that horrible house. She turned to James, who looked at her with curiosity, but Emma contained the urge to share the news. She didn't know how to explain why, but she felt she should keep it to herself, at least for now. Maybe it was the fear of creating expectations, or maybe it was something deeper, a feeling that she needed to deal with it alone. "Who was it?" James asked, concerned. "Oh, nothing special. One of those bank call things, routine stuff," Emma replied, trying to sound casual, but the tone of her voice betrayed a slight euphoria. Before he could question further, she had already changed the subject, diverting his attention. Sometime later, while James was busy with Benjamin and Evelyn was resting in the room, Emma grabbed her purse and left the house. "Going to sort out some things on the street," she said quickly without giving details. She walked briskly to the bus stop, her mind buzzing with thoughts. The bank was her first stop, and the money would be the key to changing everything. As the vehicle approached its destination, Emma's heart raced. It was the first time in a long while that she felt something close to hope. At least for now, it seemed that the universe had finally decided to give her a break. Emma entered the bank with hurried steps, her heart still racing with excitement. Each step seemed to bring her closer to a relief she could barely imagine. Finally, a chance to solve all her problems. As she walked up to the service counter, her eyes caught a familiar figure in the corner of the lobby. It was Charlotte, standing near one of the waiting chairs, with the upright posture and cold stare that Emma knew so well. "You here?" said Charlotte, her voice laden with false surprise. She approached slowly, an almost sarcastic smile on her lips. "Caleb asked me to find you. He found out what happened and wants to apologize for the confusion with the payment. I thought you'd be at home, but it seems you were busy." Emma swallowed hard, feeling her stomach churn. It was as if all the joy she'd felt before had been replaced by a suffocating discomfort. "Apologies," she repeated, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Now's not a good time, Charlotte. I need to take care of something important." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked to the teller, with Charlotte watching her closely, like a shadow. "Good afternoon. I received a call about pending amounts on my account." "I would like to verify that," Emma said to the attendant, trying to keep her voice steady but feeling Charlotte's presence right behind her. The attendant asked for some documents and started typing on the computer, while Emma tried to ignore the gaze she felt, piercing her back. Suddenly, Charlotte's voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the air like a knife. "That money is not yours, Emma." The words echoed through the room, drawing glances from other people in the bank. Emma turned to face Charlotte with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to remain calm, though her voice already showed signs of tension. Charlotte stepped forward, folding her arms. "You heard me. It's not yours. There must be some mistake. If someone left a pending amount for you, I'd bet it's some kind of error. Or you did something you shouldn't have to get that money." Emma felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, the attendant called her attention again. "Ma'am, we're verifying the details now. Please wait a moment." She nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on Charlotte, who seemed determined not to back down. The room seemed to have grown warmer, more oppressive. Emma knew this wouldn't be an easy discussion, and something inside her told her that Charlotte wasn't there by chance. The attendant returned with a serious expression, holding some papers and consulting the computer screen. "Ma'am, it seems there has been a mistake. The amount we mentioned is not related to your account. It is an amount intended for someone else, who was also mistakenly notified. We apologize for the confusion." He paused, then turned to Charlotte. "In fact, the amount is linked to Ms. Charlotte Diaz's account." Emma felt the ground open beneath her feet. All the enthusiasm that had filled her chest until a few minutes ago was replaced by an overwhelming wave of disappointment and humiliation. "So, you don't have anything for me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Unfortunately not, ma'am," the attendant replied, averting his gaze as if he wanted to avoid the expression of sadness he knew was there. Charlotte, on the other hand, couldn't contain a satisfied smile as she crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. "Ah, so that's it," she began, her tone full of malice. "You really thought there was money waiting for you? Emma, darling, sometimes it seems like you live in a fantasy world. How could you believe something like that so easily?" Emma remained silent, feeling the weight of the other customers' gazes and Charlotte's voice piercing her like shards of glass. Every word that came out of Charlotte's mouth felt like a direct punch to her stomach, humiliating her even more in a public space where everyone was watching her with curious looks, unsure of what was happening. "Charlotte, I didn't know. I thought it was true. The bank called me." "Of course you did, because that's what people like you do, always expecting a miracle, a stroke of luck that will never come," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with disdain. She stepped closer, her malicious smile widening as if she were savoring every second of Emma's defeat. "Meanwhile, people like me work hard and deserve what we have." Charlotte then opened her purse with calculated slowness, taking out a card that she handed to the attendant with the same grace of someone in total control of the situation. "You can transfer the amount to my account now, please. And Emma, maybe this will teach you not to believe in fairy tales. Don't let yourself be fooled so easily." Emma felt the tears burning her eyes, but she took a deep breath, trying to stay in control. The heat on her face, the tightness in her chest, everything seemed to be trying to overwhelm her, but she wouldn't give Charlotte that satisfaction. Not there, not in front of everyone. She refused to show weakness. The humiliation was a sharp knife piercing her chest, but deep down she knew she had to move forward. "Excuse me," she muttered, her voice trembling but firm, and turned quickly, leaving the bank before the shame consumed her completely. Outside, the sun seemed cruel, its rays burning as if the world kept spinning normally, while she felt everything around her crumbling. The streets, the people, the movement of the city seemed unreal, as if Emma was disconnected from it all. The pain of being publicly unmasked, of seeing her efforts crumble before her eyes, was unbearable. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, trying to protect herself from the void that was swallowing her, trying to get away from everyone's gaze that, at that moment, seemed more observant than they ever would be. The sound of her footsteps on the sidewalk seemed muffled, as if every move she made was a reminder of her defeat. The tears, now inevitable, began to stream down her face, but she wiped them away quickly, as if she wanted to erase what she felt, as if she could make it all disappear. Charlotte had won this battle. Emma knew that. The bitter taste of defeat was in her mouth, but there was something more, a deep desire to change everything, to not let that moment be the end. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Benjamin, about James, about Evelyn. She couldn't let that be the end of the line. She needed to find a way to move on, to get back up, but what seemed like a dead end seemed increasingly oppressive. Every step she took towards her home was an internal struggle, a battle against the despair that threatened to engulf her, against the weariness of fighting without knowing where she was going. But no matter how fallen she was, she couldn't allow herself to give up. Even though the weight of defeat was crushing her, something inside her refused to be swallowed by it. After all, it wasn't just her who depended on her, but at that moment, all she felt was the unbearable weight of the fall. Emma walked slowly through the streets, the weight of humiliation still crushing her chest, when something made her stop abruptly. Caleb, her former nanny's old boss, appeared at the corner with a desperate look on his face. He was holding a sum of money in his hands, as if he had found some salvation, but his face showed a clear state of panic. When he saw her, his eyes briefly lit up, as if he saw her as an opportunity. He took a few quick steps towards her, his voice trembling. "Emma, wait, I came looking for you. I'm sorry for what happened. I knew I should have paid, but things got difficult, and I didn't know what to do." Emma looked at him expressionless, her face blank but the pain still clear in her eyes. She didn't care about his excuses. He had already done enough to hurt her. "Do you think I care about your excuses now?" she said, her voice low but loaded with an invisible weight. "I just need something I'll never get from you. Respect. But now, I don't want anything anymore. I don't want your money. I don't want anything." Caleb seemed more disconcerted, trying to insist, but before he could say anything else, Emma interrupted him. Her frustration and fatigue exploded all at once. "You have no idea what it's like to live like this, Caleb. You don't know what it's like to have to do everything alone, taking care of a young child and a sick mother. My mother, Evelyn, needs constant care, and all I've been doing is trying to give her and my son the best I can. And you, with all your attitude, you've only made it even harder." Caleb took a step back, as if Emma's words had hit a sensitive spot. His face went pale and surprise took over his eyes. "Evelyn? You're talking about Evelyn, your mother? The woman who has health issues?" He seemed even more astonished, as if he had discovered something he had not imagined. Emma stared at him, her eyes full of a mixture of pain and anger. "Yes, Evelyn. And while you and your wife play with people's lives, I have to face this reality every day. I'm not asking anything from you, Caleb. I've already lost my dignity and my time with you. And now I just want a little peace." Emma paused, her eyes fixed on Caleb. The mention of the name Evelyn came out of her lips with a strange intonation, as if she was recognizing something she still could not fully comprehend. "Evelyn. That's my sister's name," he said, his voice low and hesitant. He seemed to be trying to connect the dots, but what he was saying didn't make sense to Emma. You're talking about my mother." Emma was paralyzed, her heart beating faster. "Your sister," she repeated in surprise. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could this be possible? What did he mean by that? She looked at him with a confused and incredulous look, her thoughts running non-stop to try to put the pieces together. Before she could digest everything she was hearing, the conversation was abruptly interrupted. Charlotte suddenly appeared, her expression cold and threatening. "Caleb, let's go," she said, without even looking at Emma. She pulled him by the arm, and he, though visibly reluctant, let himself be led away. Emma stood there, still trying to understand Caleb's words. "Evelyn, sister," she murmured to herself. Her mind was in shambles, but she had no more time to reflect. She felt that, at least for now, this conversation would have no answers. She didn't know if she was relieved to know a little more, or if the revelation only left her more confused. With a heavy sigh, Emma turned and began to walk home, the weight of the day accumulating on her shoulders. When she reached her door, the sound of screams made her quicken her pace. She quickly entered, finding Evelyn, her mother, in a fit of rage, screaming at Benjamin, her young son. "Don't you understand? Are you going to make me suffer more than I'm already suffering?" Evelyn shouted, her words charged with fury, as the boy shrank back, visibly frightened. Emma approached, her eyes narrowing, her heart beating hard. She couldn't let this happen. "Mom, what are you doing? You're yelling at him?" she said, trying to remain calm, but her voice overflowed with indignation. "He's a child, Evelyn. You can't treat him like that." Evelyn turned to her with an empty yet defiant look. "You don't understand, Emma. He's doing everything wrong. I can't take it anymore." Her mother's anger seemed to intensify with every word. "I can't be treated like this by him. I'm the mother." Emma felt a wave of frustration and pain, the same she had felt so many times before. Her mother was completely lost, immersed in a distorted reality that she could no longer control. "You can't keep going like this, Evelyn," she said, her voice firm but full of sadness. "You're hurting me, and you're hurting Benjamin too. He's just a child." Evelyn snorted, clearly more irritated. "Don't meddle, Emma. You don't know anything. Are you going to keep defending him like you always do?" The atmosphere became tense, the silence between them cutting until Emma, exhausted, no longer knew what to do. Her son's crying echoed through the house, and she knew she needed to find a solution to all of this, but for now she was lost. The next day, Emma and James were sitting in the kitchen, the atmosphere charged with a silent tension. Emma toyed distractedly with her cup of tea, while James seemed to be searching for the right words, unsure of how to start the conversation they had both been avoiding for some time. "I don't know what to do with my mother anymore, James," Emma said, her voice low and trembling, as if each word was a burden too heavy to bear. "She's getting harder and harder, out of control. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." James looked at her with concern, his eyes reflecting the weariness they both felt. "I understand, Emma. I see it too. And I know how hard you try, but maybe it's time we thought about another way to care for her. Something safer for all of us." Emma felt a tightness in her chest, anguish gripping her throat. She knew what he meant, but she didn't want to hear it. "You don't think I'm doing my best for her? I don't know anymore. I wish it were different." James stood up and walked over to her, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of comfort, but also of determination. "I know you're doing your best, Emma, but there are times when things need to change, for the good of everyone. For her good too. We can't keep going like this." Emma looked at him, seeking answers, but also feeling the weight of the responsibility they both carried. I don't know if I'm ready for this, James. I don't know how to deal with this idea." James sighed, sitting down beside her. "I know it's not easy, but maybe it's best, so she can have what she needs and so we can move on too." Silence took over the kitchen, heavy and uncomfortable. Emma wanted to say something, to protest, but she couldn't find the words. It was too difficult a decision to make. She knew James was partly right, but what he was suggesting seemed to tear a part of her away. But something inside her knew that somehow this needed to happen, even if it was painful. On the other side of the room, Evelyn was standing still, her eyes fixed on the conversation between Emma and James. She didn't want to intervene, but the words she heard pierced like sharp knives into her heart. With each passing sentence, she felt her body weaken, as if the foundation of her existence was slowly crumbling. When James spoke about something safer for all of us, Evelyn felt her chest tighten. The idea, the possibility of being separated from her daughter, the only family she had left, tortured her in a way she couldn't fully comprehend. It was as if her entire world was about to be taken from her hands, and she found herself unable to do anything about it. Tears began to fall, without her being able to stop them. Evelyn stood there motionless, her trembling hands clutching her blouse against her chest. She didn't know what to do, but something inside her told her that something very painful was about to happen. She tried to hold back her sobs, but the anguish was stronger. She felt lost, not knowing what would happen next. She wouldn't say anything. She didn't want to interfere any more than she already had. But the sadness that took hold of her was profound, as if something was being torn from her heart. And yet, she remained silent, swallowing the words she would have liked to shout, trying to hide the pain, but failing. The next afternoon, Emma and James approached Evelyn with forced smiles, trying to hide the concern on their faces. "Mom, we found a wonderful place for you," Emma said, her voice soft but laden with a tone Evelyn couldn't immediately interpret. "It'll be good for you. It'll be peaceful." Upon hearing these words, Evelyn felt a wave of panic forming in the pit of her chest. She raised her trembling hands, trying to protest. "No, I don't want to go. I don't want to leave here." Her voice was low, almost inaudible, but the denial was clear in her eyes. She knew somehow that something was wrong, but she didn't know exactly what. James held her firmly by the shoulders. "It'll be best for all of us, Evelyn. Trust us." And without another word, they began to guide her to the car. Evelyn tried to resist, her feet seeming unwilling to walk, her body stiffened by tension and fear, but deep down, she knew she had no power to prevent it. The journey was a silent torment. With each mile traveled, Evelyn's fear grew. Her body was frozen with terror, and her mind kept spinning with confused thoughts. What was happening? Where were they taking her? What would happen to her there? The silence inside the car was dense, interrupted only by the sounds of the road and Evelyn's panting breath. She couldn't understand why this was happening, why they were doing this to her. Her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but her mind was far away in a place of pure despair. When they finally arrived, Evelyn could barely get out of the car. Her legs were weak, and the fear was so intense that it seemed to take over every cell of her body. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but didn't know where, or if anyone would hear her. And with the feeling that something was being irreversibly taken from her life, she was led inside, feeling like a prisoner in a nightmare she couldn't control. Evelyn was so dazed that she barely noticed her surroundings. She felt her head spinning, her heart racing as if each step she took led her deeper into an endless nightmare. But as she looked ahead, something made her stop. She blinked, trying to understand what she saw. There, standing at the door, was a man smiling, a welcoming smile, almost as if time hadn't passed. Evelyn's heart leapt in her chest. Her eyes began to shine, confusion gradually dissipating. She looked at him more closely until suddenly reality set in. That man was her brother. "Caleb!" she cried, the words coming out like a sigh of relief and disbelief. Emotion overwhelmed her, and without thinking she ran towards her brother, her legs almost stumbling over her own body, but instinct propelled her towards him. Tears began to fall, and as she got closer, she hugged him with all the strength she had left, as if he were the only anchor in a turbulent sea. "Caleb, my brother, I didn't know. Evelyn sobbed, her voice choked with emotion, as if words couldn't express the whirlwind of feelings that now took hold of her. Her arms tightened around him with an almost desperate force, as if she feared that if she let go, he might disappear. She closed her eyes, trying to convince herself that this was real, that he was there, alive, and that, no matter how much time had separated their paths, this moment was theirs. She was no longer alone. Caleb, surprised but visibly emotional, hugged her back with the same intensity, his arms enveloping his sister with a care and affection she never imagined feeling again. "I know, Evelyn. I know," he said, his voice soft but laden with silent pain. He pulled her against his body, with a gesture so gentle it seemed to carry years of unspoken longing and regret. His eyes, also brimming with tears, reflected the relief they were both experiencing. "I never wanted to leave you, you know that. But now we're together again." Emma and James stood in silence, observing from a distance. They didn't know what to say or how to act in the face of such an emotionally charged scene. Emma felt a knot in her chest, a mixture of relief and sadness, while James, by her side, seemed unsure of how to react. They just watched as the years of separation between Evelyn and Caleb unraveled in a single embrace. The unspoken words, the moments they never lived together, everything seemed to be reclaimed in that moment. Evelyn's face, once marked by tension, distrust, and fear of the unknown, was now softened by a tear-filled smile. She was no longer scared. The weight that had always accompanied her seemed to be slowly dissipating. As she looked at Caleb, she saw not only her brother but also a part of the past that, until then, seemed lost. He was there, and now, by his side, she felt she could face whatever the future had in store. The worst of her life, that constant fear of being abandoned, was in a way being left behind. Emma, still from afar, observed the scene with a mixture of emotions. She knew that moment was significant, but she also felt that her own role in that story was becoming more complex. The unspoken words between her and Evelyn, the weight of the decisions she would have to make, all of that mixed with the conflicting feelings that invaded her heart. She didn't know what the future would bring for her mother, for her son, and for her relationship with James. But in that moment, she saw something she had never imagined. Evelyn finally finding something she seemed to have lost forever, her connection with her brother, the certainty that life, despite all difficulties, could still offer some kind of redemption. And with that, Emma felt a glimmer of hope arise amidst the darkness that had so enveloped her. As they entered the house, the atmosphere of relief that hung in the air was soon interrupted by a sudden sound, something heavy being dragged upstairs. Caleb, his eyes still shining from the emotion of reuniting with his sister, made a gesture with his hand as if he wanted to ignore the interruption. However, the noise grew louder, as if something was being thrown against the floor, and that made them stop immediately. The smile on Evelyn's face disappeared, and her eyes widened with worry. Who is there?" Caleb asked, doubt now replacing the euphoria he had felt minutes before. Emma, her heart racing, held James's hand, and with an apprehensive look, indicated that they should follow the direction of the noise. They climbed the stairs quickly, the tension growing with each step. When they reached the living room, what they saw left them in shock. Charlotte was there, amidst a chaos of open suitcases and bags, packing away wads of cash, large stacks of bills. She looked towards the entrance of the room, seeing Caleb and his sister, and showed no surprise. Instead, a cold smile formed on her lips. "Charlotte!" Evelyn exclaimed, confused and frightened. "What are you doing here? Why all this?" Charlotte didn't bother giving an explanation, nor did she care about anyone's reaction. She simply laughed in a hissing manner. "Oh, Evelyn, I thought you would have realized by now it's not just your brother who has secrets." She gestured towards the suitcases around her. "This money, dear brother, is mine now. And if you think about reporting it, well, I suggest you reconsider." Caleb was paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the suitcases of money, and then he looked at Charlotte, as if she had dealt him a fatal blow. You stole from me." "Of course," Charlotte said, her voice indifferent. "And there's no use doing anything, Caleb. If you go to the police, I'll make sure you have a domestic assault charge on you. It'll be your word against mine, and who do you think the authorities will believe?" She gave a venomous smile, as if she had won the battle, but the glint in her eyes revealed the insecurity behind her arrogance. Emma looked at James, completely astonished, unable to believe what she was hearing. You won't do that, Charlotte." "You won't get away with it," Emma said, the words escaping with a tone of growing anger. But Charlotte merely laughed, scoffing at them. "You think you can do anything? You, a mere nanny? You have no idea what's going on here? I'm in control now, and if anyone tries to interfere, there'll be another person to pay the price." Charlotte made a vague gesture with her hand, as if it were the easiest thing in the world to destroy everyone there. Evelyn was in a state of shock, the reality hitting hard and relentless. "Caleb, I don't understand. What's happening? What did she do to you?" Caleb remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the suitcases and Charlotte's cruel face. She used me, deceived me all along," he said, in a low and sorrowful tone. "But now that you're here, Evelyn, I won't let her do anything else. We'll find a way out of this." Charlotte, seeing that things were starting to tighten, gestured towards the suitcases. "It was too late, Caleb. I've already done what I wanted. Now either you let me go in peace, or the accusation will come fast and no one will come out unscathed from this story." The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone was aware that the situation had taken an unexpected and much more dangerous turn than anyone could have imagined. Emma, with clenched fists and heavy breathing, could no longer contain herself. The anger, the frustration, the disgust at everything that had happened all exploded in a single moment. She looked intently at Caleb, her gaze burning with indignation. You've always been so foolish, Caleb," she burst out, her voice cutting through the air. "You always ignored everything I did for you, everything I sacrificed. Look where it's gotten you. Now you're paying for your own blindness." She gestured towards Charlotte, who was there impassive, watching everything with a Machiavellian smile. "You've always been so blind, so distant. I helped you, and you saw nothing. Now you're suffering the consequences. Consequences that you yourself created by ignoring everything I tried to do for you." Caleb remained silent, the expression of pain and guilt taking over his face. He knew Emma was right. He had always been distracted, oblivious to what was happening around him, and now it was all crumbling down. Charlotte, observing the tension in the room, approached with a venomous smile. She turned to Emma with an air of superiority. "You think you're entitled to anything, Emma?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes glinting with malice. "The money you think was yours was never actually yours. It was yours, until I found a way to take it. And I did it because you don't deserve anything. You don't deserve anything you have, anything you want." Emma felt as if she had been punched in the stomach, each of Charlotte's words cutting deeper than anything else. Charlotte's anger and contempt were so evident that Emma felt a sense of humiliation wash over her. "I deserve much more than you think, Charlotte," Emma shouted, her eyes filling with angry tears. "I fought, made sacrifices you would never understand. I did everything for my family, but you only used the people around you. How can you say that? How can you be so cruel?" Charlotte merely laughed, a low and scornful sound. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Emma. You thought you were in control, that you had life under control, but you're seeing now, aren't you?" She looked at the money scattered across the suitcases and with a lazy gesture said, "I found a way, and you, Emma, will never understand what really happened here. Because in the end, the one who always had everything in their hands was you, and you didn't know how to appreciate anything." Emma, feeling a wave of despair and revolt, looked at James and Evelyn as if seeking some kind of support. But at that moment she knew she had to fight alone. "This won't stay like this, Charlotte, it won't." Caleb, still standing, finally spoke with a trembling voice. "Emma, I apologize to you. I should have seen this before. I should have paid more attention to you." Emma looked at him with a mixture of pain and fatigue. "You don't have to apologize. You've lost much more than me. You lost the time you could have spent with your sister, with us, and now. Look what happened. Charlotte, with her lies and manipulations, destroyed everything. But Charlotte, with a triumphant smile, just shrugged, as if all of that was just a game for her. So go ahead, Emma. Do whatever you want. But remember, you won't accomplish anything. I've already won." The atmosphere was charged with tension. Every word exchanged between Emma, Caleb and Charlotte seemed a new blow, a new cut in the soul. Emma was still recovering from Charlotte's cruel words when suddenly something strange happened. Charlotte, who until then had maintained a disdainful and provocative posture, stopped speaking suddenly. Her eyes widened and her face, once full of malice, turned pale. She put her hand on her chest. Her eyes widened, and before anyone could react, Charlotte took a step back, tripping over her own legs. The air, which was once heavy with anger and accusations, became heavy with an inexplicable fear. Charlotte fell to the ground with a thud, and everything around fell silent. "Charlotte?" Emma asked, her voice tense, but not knowing what to do. What was happening? James approached quickly, but his expression soon turned to shock when he saw Charlotte's blank stare. Caleb was paralyzed, his eyes fixed on Charlotte, not understanding what was happening. He knelt down next to her, touching her neck, but quickly pulled away, his eyes brimming with a horrible realization. She is dead," he muttered, his voice trembling and incredulous. Emma looked at Charlotte lying on the floor, her body motionless. The sound of everyone's breathing seemed deafening, but silence took over the room. Charlotte, with all her games and manipulations, was now there, lifeless. The shock was immense and no one could react immediately. Emma stood there, her eyes fixed on Charlotte's lifeless body on the floor, still not fully understanding what had just happened. The woman who had humiliated her so much, who destroyed part of her life, was there, lying on the floor, cold and inert. What to do now? The question echoed in Emma's mind, but deep down she knew that nothing could really change what was to come. Charlotte had already caused the damage she wanted, and her death, though a relief, would not erase the suffering that Emma and Caleb had endured at her hands. James, by his side, was astonished. His expression was a mixture of amazement and confusion. He looked at Emma as if searching for some answer, an explanation for the chaos that had taken over that house. "Emma, this is real?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emma averted her gaze from Charlotte and looked at James. She didn't know what to say. She had no words to describe the whirlwind of feelings that dominated her. It was as if time had stopped there, in those few fractions of a second between Charlotte's fall and the realization of her death. Caleb, on the other hand, was in an even greater state of shock. He stood still beside Charlotte, looking at her with wide eyes, unable to process what had just happened. His expression was of pure disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how his wife, who had always been so cruel and manipulative, could simply disappear like that, without warning. She died, Caleb muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I can't believe it." He ran his hand over his face, trying to shake off the confusion, pain, and fear that was spreading through his chest. Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. She saw the pain in Caleb's eyes, but she couldn't feel compassion, not after everything he had let pass, not after he had remained blind to Charlotte's true face, to the suffering she caused. Emma didn't know what he would feel with Charlotte's death, but she was sure that wouldn't be the end of her struggle. She still had her own battle to fight. "She destroyed our lives, Caleb," Emma said, her voice low but firm. "She made you believe her lies and manipulated everything around her. I don't feel sorry for her." Caleb looked at Emma, the words stuck in his throat. "I know." He finally spoke, his voice broken. "But still, she was my wife. And it's complicated." He didn't finish the sentence, the internal struggle evident on his face. He didn't know what else he could say. The loss of Charlotte left him in a state of total confusion. Emma felt a mixture of anger and relief. Charlotte, the woman who had caused her so much pain, was now in eternal silence, but the void that left in Emma's life could not be easily filled. She still carried the weight of everything she had experienced, and even though Charlotte had left, the suffering of Emma and everyone around her would not disappear with the death of her enemy. James, seeing Emma's tense expression, knew she was going through something much bigger than anyone there could understand. He looked at her carefully, knowing that despite all the confusion, she was struggling to deal with everything. "I don't know what to do now," Caleb said, moving away from Charlotte and looking at Emma and James with a lost look. "She was controlling me, but now, I don't know what to do with all this." Emma looked at him with a sigh. "You'll have to find your way, Caleb. We can no longer live in the past hoping things will change on their own." She turned to James, who watched her in silence. I don't know what to do either, but I need to start looking forward to what's to come." Charlotte's death did not bring a sense of closure to Emma. Instead, it brought the feeling that there were still many things to be resolved, that the real struggle was just beginning. The relief of knowing that Charlotte could no longer cause harm to anyone soon dissipated, giving way to an emptiness that somehow still seemed too heavy to carry. The future of Emma, Caleb, James, and everyone involved was at stake, and although Charlotte had left, the path ahead would still be long and unpredictable. Time passed, and after a series of investigations and documents that were finally accessed, it became clear to everyone that the money Charlotte had stolen from Caleb really belonged to Emma. It was a relief for her, but also a bitter confirmation of everything that had happened. Emma never wanted things to reach that point, but at least now she knew she could recover what was rightfully hers. On a quiet afternoon, Caleb called Emma for a conversation. They were in the living room, the sunlight softly entering through the windows, but the atmosphere was heavy, as if the weight of Charlotte's death still lingered in the air. I've been thinking, Emma," Caleb began, his voice soft but laden with a weight she already knew well. "Charlotte died that way because of everything she did, not just with you, but with everyone around us. She was always selfish, manipulative, didn't know any other way but to control and hurt. Maybe in some way she paid for it all." Emma looked at Caleb, her eyes firm, but a silent sadness was still present. "I don't know, Caleb," she replied slowly, the pain still fresh in her mind. "I don't know if it's some kind of justice, or if all this was a burden no one should carry. She caused so much pain, but at the same time I can't help but wonder if her death was a consequence of everything she did or something more. I don't know if any of us deserved this." Caleb was silent, as if pondering Emma's words. Charlotte's death, despite being an end to that story, left a deep scar on everyone's life. They had been entangled in her game of manipulation and control, and now, even without her, they were all trying to recompose themselves. "I know that nothing can erase what she did, Emma," Caleb said finally. "But perhaps now, with her out of the way, we can start to build something new, something healthier for all of us." Emma took a deep breath, feeling a slight sense of relief but also uncertainty. "I hope so. I hope that after all this we can start to live without her shadow over us." Caleb nodded, and for a moment the two fell silent, as if reflecting on the weight of the words and what still needed to be done. Charlotte's death had been shocking, but also revealing of so many truths that had been hidden for years. Now they were facing a new chapter, a chapter that, though marked by loss and pain, also offered the chance to start over. But what the future held for Emma, for Caleb, and for everyone around them was still a great mystery. They had much to face, and the road ahead would be more difficult than anyone could imagine. Over time, the wounds began to heal, and everyone's life took more peaceful and happy turns. Emma and James dedicated themselves to starting over with a renewed spirit, valuing even more the unity they maintained in their small family. The recovered money was used wisely. Emma was able to renovate the house, making it more comfortable for everyone, especially for Benjamin, who now had a room of his own, full of toys and books, something he had never had before. After Charlotte's death, Caleb realized that his life needed changes. For the first time, he began to rebuild his relationship with Evelyn, spending long afternoons talking about the childhood they had shared, the lost years, and the choices that had driven them apart. Caleb decided to sell the old house where he lived with Charlotte and bought a new property near Emma's house. This way, he could always be nearby, taking care of his sister and following the life of his niece and Benjamin. Beside Caleb, Emma found a new kind of support. Now she had someone she could fully trust. The long conversations that were once permeated with anguish gave way to light and hopeful dialogues. Caleb became a paternal figure for both Emma and Benjamin, filling the house with his affectionate and calm presence. Gradually, Evelyn began to change. Caleb's presence helped her overcome old traumas and better deal with her emotions. She still had her difficult days, but now there were more smiles than tears. Caleb always made sure to involve her in family activities, from dinners to small walks around the neighborhood, showing Evelyn that she was loved and valued. One day, James came home with good news. After years of struggling to achieve stability at work, he was promoted to a better position. He knew this meant a new opportunity to offer more comfort to the family and relieve the burden Emma carried. "Now things will get easier," he said, hugging Emma, who smiled with relief, feeling that they were finally in a safe place. Over the months, life took on a calm and happy rhythm. Caleb and Evelyn became inseparable, often going out together for walks or just sitting on the porch, laughing at old stories. Benjamin grew up healthy and full of energy, always running around the house and filling everyone with joy. He loved to listen to Caleb's stories about his youth and loved to play with his grandmother, who finally allowed herself to smile more. Emma and James, now more connected than ever, found in their union a strength that seemed unshakable. Even with the challenges they had faced, they both knew that everything had been overcome because they were together. They learned to value the simple moments, like a family dinner or an afternoon playing with Benjamin in the yard. On a sunny afternoon, while everyone was gathered in Emma's garden, Caleb suggested something special. "How about we take a picture together? Something to mark this moment." Everyone agreed, and James brought an old camera he had kept. They positioned themselves under a leafy tree, with Benjamin in the center, holding Emma and Caleb's hands. Evelyn, with a smile that radiated peace, was next to James, and everyone drew closer, forming a warm embrace as the camera captured that moment of genuine happiness. In that moment, it became clear to everyone that despite all the difficulties, they had managed to find each other. More than a family, they were a safe haven, a reminder that love, unity, and forgiveness could overcome any obstacle. The past could not be erased, but now it served only as a backdrop for a promising and bright future. Years passed, and everyone's life had taken surprisingly peaceful and happy turns. Emma and James, now with slightly graying hair, sat on the porch of a spacious house, built with much effort and love. Benjamin, now 18 years old, was about to start college, something that filled Emma with pride. He had grown up healthy, intelligent, and with a huge heart, always concerned about his family. Caleb, despite his advanced age, still maintained the same vigor and joy that had won over everyone around him. He had become a central figure in the family, the link that kept everyone united. Caleb often gathered the family for big lunches in the yard of his house, which was now filled with plants and flowers that he tended to with dedication. Evelyn, by her brother's side, seemed like a new person. The bitter woman from before had disappeared, giving way to someone lighter and more serene. One afternoon, while everyone was gathered in the garden at Caleb's house, Emma watched the scene with a nostalgic smile. Benjamin was helping Caleb light the grill, while James played with the grandchildren of one of the neighbors. Evelyn was sitting in a comfortable chair, a book in her hands, but her eyes were more focused on the family than on the pages. Emma approached James, who looked at her with the same sparkle in his eyes as when they first met. "Have you noticed how everything has changed? It seems like it was just yesterday that we were struggling to survive, not knowing what tomorrow would bring." James nodded, holding her hand firmly. Their fingers intertwined as if he never wanted to let go again. "And look where we've ended up, Emma. It was difficult, but we made it. Every tear, every sacrifice, it was all worth it. We built this together, and now we have something that no one can take away from us." His voice carried a mixture of gratitude and pride, and Emma couldn't help but smile, feeling the warmth of that truth in her heart. At that moment, Caleb's voice echoed through the yard, like a familiar melody filling the environment. "Come here, before I eat everything by myself." He was holding a tray with freshly grilled meat, his wide and inviting smile. The phrase, so typical of him, drew laughter from everyone. In a matter of minutes, the table was full not only with food, but also with stories and laughter that turned the dinner into something special. As they ate, the conversations flowed naturally, mixing memories of the past with dreams for the future. Benjamin, his eyes shining with determination, spoke about his plans to study something related to helping people. "I want to make a difference, just like my mother did for me. I think I've found my purpose, and that's what I want to pursue." His words filled Emma with pride, and she held back tears, feeling deeply grateful to see her son grow with such strength and kindness. "You're going to be amazing, my boy," said Caleb, toasting with a glass of juice. "This world needs more people like you." Evelyn, sitting beside him, smiled discreetly, but her eyes said it all. Although she didn't speak much, she was visibly emotional. The atmosphere was welcoming, and every laugh that echoed seemed to erase a little more of the shadows of the past. When the afternoon began to give way to twilight, the sky took on golden and rosy hues, painting the backyard with a soft and magical light. Caleb stood up, and with a look full of enthusiasm, suggested something that everyone knew he loved. "Shall we take another family photo? The last one was years ago, and I think we deserve a new one to record how we are now. I want to keep this forever." Everyone readily agreed, and Benjamin was the first to stand up. He walked into the house and came back with the tripod and camera that Caleb always used for special occasions. Caleb adjusted the angles, but insisted that Benjamin should be in charge of positioning everyone. "You are the future of this family, my boy. Show us how it's done." The family positioned themselves in the garden, each occupying their spot with casualness and genuine smiles. Emma stood between James and Benjamin, while Caleb and Evelyn stood close by, sharing the same wooden bench. Benjamin set the timer and ran to join the group, barely containing his laughter as he stumbled in his slippers. In the instant, the camera's click captured the image. It captured far more than smiling faces. It captured the essence of a united family who had overcome adversity with love and resilience, and who now savored the fruits of everything they had built together. As night finally fell, enveloping the backyard in a cloak of darkness dotted with the first stars blinking shyly in the sky, Emma drifted away from the table and walked towards the horizon. The cool night breeze touched her face, bringing with it the subtle fragrance of the flowers Benjamin had planted around the garden. She crossed her arms, embracing herself as she looked up at the sky, as if the constellations held the promise of an even brighter future. There was something almost magical about that moment, something that made time seem to slow down, allowing her to absorb every detail. James, who had been watching her from afar, noticed her reflective silence and also stood up, approaching her unhurriedly. He wrapped his arms around her protectively, the warmth of his touch contrasting with the coolness of the wind. Emma leaned against him, feeling secure in that embrace. "What is it, Emma? You have that look of someone thinking about something important. Any worries?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, laden with curiosity and affection. Emma lifted her gaze to him for a moment, before turning back to the sky as if searching the stars for the right words. "I'm thinking about how we are exactly where we're supposed to be, James. For so long I thought everything would crumble, that we would never have a real chance to be happy. I thought fate was always against us, that there was no way out. But look at us now. We're here together, living something that almost feels like a dream. This is everything I've always wanted, and sometimes it even feels surreal." James held her tighter, leaning in to kiss her forehead lingeringly, as if he wanted to convey through that gesture all the gratitude and admiration he felt. "And I'll always be here to make sure it stays that way. You are my strength, Emma. Without you, none of this would have been possible. We're a team, we always have been, and nothing and no one can take us down now. We deserve this happiness, every bit of it." In the distance, Caleb and Evelyn were sitting side by side on a small bench in the corner of the backyard, watching the scene with serene looks. Caleb, with a tranquil smile, turned to his sister as if he wanted to share his thoughts. They deserve this, don't you think? After everything they've been through, after all the struggles and sacrifices, it's good to see them like this, finally at peace. His voice was laden with tenderness, and he seemed to mentally relive the difficult moments they had faced together. Evelyn held the necklace Caleb had given her years ago, a small locket that now seemed to contain more memories than objects. She looked at him, her eyes shining with the same emotion her brother felt. Yes, they deserve it, we deserve it. No matter what the past has taken from us, now we have each other. And that's what truly matters. Everything we need is right here in this family. Her smile, soft but full of meaning, lit up Caleb's face. He nodded, as if her words were the confirmation of something he had always believed. You're right, Evelyn. We are exactly where we're supposed to be, and from now on only good things will come. As the stars shone in the sky, the family remained gathered in the backyard, the sound of laughter echoing through the peaceful night. Caleb, inspired by the moment, stood up and made a suggestion. You know what I think is missing here? A new family photo. The last one was years ago, and I want something to hang in the living room, to look at and remember how we got here. The idea was met with immediate enthusiasm, as if it were the perfect conclusion to such a meaningful day. Benjamin, ever practical and agile, stood up energetically and went to fetch the tripod and camera that Caleb carefully kept at home. As he adjusted the equipment, the family moved around the garden, joking and deciding where each one would stand for the photo. Caleb made sure to be in the center, while Evelyn insisted on holding the necklace she always carried, as a reminder of the roots they never forgot. Emma and James, side by side, intertwined their fingers naturally, symbolizing the unbreakable bond they had built over the years. Benjamin adjusted the timer precisely and ran to join the group, almost tripping on a stone on the way, eliciting laughter from everyone. When the camera's click finally captured the moment, it wasn't just a static image that was recorded. It was a reflection of each of their journeys, a testament to the love that united them, the strength that sustained them through difficult times, and the genuine joy that now illuminated their faces. They were not just rehearsed smiles and poses, but the essence of a family that had faced the worst and together had found a way to the best. As Benjamin adjusted the camera to check if the photo had turned out well, Emma, feeling the warmth of the moment, looked around and absorbed every detail. The soft evening light, the distant sound of cicadas, the murmur of conversations between Caleb and Evelyn. Everything seemed incredibly real, yet almost magical, as if it belonged to a dream. The photograph was not just to hang on the wall but a time capsule, an eternal reminder that, even after so many storms, calm was possible. If Emma and Rosa's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and check out the story appearing on the screen now, specially chosen for you. See you soon.